Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
She pulled a gun on him. He said, "You should have shot my heart first." She came out of the dust, angry, scared, and tired of trusting the wrong men. When she pulled a gun on him, he didn't flinch, just smiled and said, "You should have shot my heart first." The storm forced them into the same shelter, and silence did what words never could. It reminded them who they were before the pain. When the bullets came, she fought beside him, not as an outlaw, but as someone worth saving. That night, by the fire, two broken souls found a reason to keep living. By dawn, she no longer aimed to kill, she aimed to love. And in his quiet eyes, she finally found her peace. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight and when the story ends? Don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Arizona, 1883. The sun was setting over a cracked desert, spilling fire across the earth. A lonely dirt trail stretched between the wind and the red dust, where every grain of sand seemed to carry a whisper from the past. In the distance, the soft echo of hooves broke the silence, steady, solitary, fading into the dying light. A man rode slowly across the desert, his worn leather coat dark with dust, a tilted Stetson shadowing half his face. The wind tugged at his faded scarf, carrying with it the scent of smoke and sweat from too many restless miles. His name was Elias Ward, a drifter with no home left to return to, accompanied only by the desert and its silence. When the last line of sunset brushed his shoulder, a voice cut through the wind, hoarse, trembling, but filled with steel. "Stop right there. Don't move." Out of the swirling dust stepped a woman, a gray dress, sun-darkened skin, eyes bright with fury and grief. Her hand shook as she leveled a revolver straight at his chest. The wind caught her hair, tangled it across her face. The gunmetal glinted in the last light of the sun. Elias stopped. No flinch, no fear. Only that still, fathomless gaze, the kind that had seen too much to be startled anymore. Then, slowly, he smiled. A small, weary smile, the kind that belonged to men who'd buried too many memories. When he spoke, his voice was deep, rough, and edged with the bitterness of a life already lost once before. "You should have shot my heart first." The world seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, even the wind stopped moving. Between the cold barrel of her gun and the warmth in his eyes, something shifted, something fragile, unexplainable. Why wasn't he afraid of dying? Why did his eyes hold peace instead of terror, as if a bullet meant nothing compared to the pain he already carried? The wind rose, scattering red dust like ashes. His scarf whipped through the air, brushing against the gun in her trembling hands. Sand began to cover them both, two strangers standing still under the weight of 1,000 untold stories. And in that moment, it felt as though the desert itself had written its oldest curse once more, that love and hatred in the Wild West were born in the very same breath. And from that single heartbeat of silence, their story began between a man who no longer feared death and a woman who had forgotten how to believe in life. Part 1. The Stranger in the Dust. The sun dipped behind the red cliffs, leaving the last streaks of gold bleeding across the desert road. Fine dust swirled in the wind, tinting the air with the color of burnt copper. No birds, no voices, only the whistle of dry wind through cactus spines and the steady, hollow rhythm of hooves, the heartbeat of a lone rider. Elias Ward rode slowly forward. Each step of his horse struck the ground like the echo of a man who had traveled too far through loneliness. His leather coat was frayed at the shoulders, the revolver on his hip dulled by dust. Violence no longer tempted him. He only sought peace, a thing the West never offered freely. But peace would not come today. From the rise ahead, a figure emerged, Rose Dalton, her hair whipped wildly in the wind, eyes dark and fierce, carrying the fire of a grudge that time had not extinguished. She stepped into the road, raised her gun, and aimed at him. "Stop," her voice cracked, hoarse yet trembling. Elias pulled the reins, and his horse halted. He didn't reach for his weapon, didn't flinch, didn't speak. He only looked at her, calm, steady, and unreadable. For a moment, Rose felt her heartbeat stumble. There was something in his eyes, a strange familiarity, a softness buried beneath the dust, a sadness she couldn't name. It was the kind of gaze she might have once seen in a dream, or in another lifetime. She tried to suppress the tremor in her hand, gripping the gun tighter. "You're the one who killed my father at Red Valley. Aren't you?" Her voice quivered against the wind. Elias said nothing. No denial. No confession. Just a silence so deep it felt like he was asking her for something she couldn't yet understand. The wind rose, whipping up a storm of red sand. She shut her eyes for an instant, then opened them again, finger tightening on the trigger. And then, just before the shot, Elias spoke, his voice low and dry as desert stone. "If you're gonna kill me, look me in the eyes while you do it." The words shattered everything. Rose's hands began to shake so violently that the gun slipped from her grasp, falling into the sand with a dull thud. Tears welled up and rolled down her cheeks, mixing with the dust, hot and bitter. She didn't know why she was crying. Maybe because the hatred was too heavy, or maybe because the man standing before her, the one who neither begged nor blamed, made her realize she might be pointing a gun at the only person who didn't deserve to die. And in that single moment, between the howling wind and the dying light, their story began, a destined crossing between guilt and grace, between a man who no longer feared death and a woman who had forgotten how to believe in life. Part 2. The Shelter of Sandstorm. The desert sky began to change. The red glow of dusk faded into a swirling haze, rising from the horizon like a beast awakening. The wind howled a long, hollow cry, like the wail of lost souls drifting through the canyons. Rose Dalton squinted toward the distance and saw it, a rolling wall of gold and dust charging toward them, twisting violently in the dying light. "Sandstorm," Elias said quietly, his voice rough but calm, too calm for what was coming. He turned, ready to dismount and find shelter, but the muzzle of her gun was still aimed straight at his chest. "Go first," Rose said sharply. "I don't need you leading me anywhere." Elias's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile, not mockery either. "If you want to live through this, follow me," he said simply. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before the sky swallows us whole." She hesitated, then nodded. The wind picked up, fierce and biting. The air turned thick with dust. Sand stung their faces like tiny blades. They led their horses, heads bowed, forcing their way through the storm. Every step felt like dragging the past behind them. Finally, through the swirling red haze, Elias spotted a small wooden structure, a half-collapsed stable, weathered and leaning. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He pulled the door open and gestured for her to enter first. The door slammed shut behind them, muffling the storm outside. The walls groaned, dust trickling through every crack. In the dim light, Rose stood with her back to the wall, gun still in hand. Elias removed his hat, brushed the sand from his coat, and sat down in a far corner quiet, still, as if she weren't even there. He took a small canteen from his bag, drank once, then placed it gently on the floor and slid it toward her. "You'll need water." She glanced at him, eyes wary, voice dry as the desert itself. "I don't need your pity." Elias didn't reply. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the sliver of light cutting through the boards where the storm roared and clawed at the world outside. After a while, Rose coughed, dry and harsh. Dust burned her throat. Her hand trembled. The revolver in her grip wavered. Elias stood up slowly. Without a word, he took off his worn leather jacket. He moved toward her, unhurried, giving her time to step back if she wished. But she didn't. He laid the jacket gently over her shoulders and returned to his place. No accusation, no demand, no threat. She looked down. The jacket was heavy, warm, carrying his scent of smoke and sun. Something tightened inside her chest, not fear, but a strange, forgotten feeling, the comfort of being cared for. Outside, the sandstorm screamed, battering the old stable like an angry god. Inside, the lantern flickered weakly, its light casting soft shadows across Elias's face, dust-streaked, scarred, but calm. He looked like a man carved from stone, weathered yet unbroken. Rose found herself watching him longer than she meant to. "Are you not going to ask who I am?" she said at last, her voice trembling. Elias opened his eyes, meeting hers. His tone was slow, even, heavy with truth. "Don't need to. You're already carrying enough pain. A name won't change that." She gave a small, bitter laugh, then fell silent. The storm outside shifted, howling like a wounded animal. The walls shook, dust rained from the ceiling. In the flicker of the lantern, she saw the faint scars running down his cheek and neck, old wounds, healed but never forgotten. "You lost someone?" she asked quietly. Elias looked down, voice low, steady as falling stones. "Lost everything, family, land, and the reason to believe in people. So you see, there's nothing left to be afraid of." The words hung heavy in the air. Rose stared at the gun in her hand, then back at him. For the first time, hatred didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like a burden. Thunder rumbled faintly. Sand lashed the door like rain. She pulled his jacket closer, breathing in the scent of leather and smoke. In that fragile warmth, for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Elias lifted his gaze. The lantern light reflected in his amber eyes as he answered, slow, deep, every word carved from experience, 'cause fear's a luxury a man loses when he's already lost everything. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Something in her cracked. That simple truth, raw, honest, broke through the armor she'd worn for so long. Because maybe he understood her pain better than anyone ever could. Outside, the storm howled on. Inside, there was only the sound of breathing two strangers sharing a fragile peace in the middle of nowhere. The lantern swayed. Light washed over their faces, two lost souls taking refuge from a storm neither of them saw coming. both unaware that this night would mark the beginning of their healing. And as the winds began to fade, Rose looked at the man who had given her his jacket, his calm, and a piece of his truth. For the first time in a long, long while, she felt safe. Part 3. The Forgotten Memory. The fire in the old stable burned low, its light flickering against weathered planks darkened by time. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, sand, and silence, the quiet kind that follows after a storm, where even the wind seems to breathe softer. Elias sat slouched against a beam, hat pulled low, eyes glowing faintly like embers buried in ash. Across from him, Rose leaned against the opposite wall, revolver still in her lap, steady now, not shaking anymore. Outside, the horses exhaled softly, and in the stillness, she could hear her own heartbeat mingling with theirs. She looked at him, voice small but edged with curiosity. "You said you lost everything. Your family. What happened to them?" Elias didn't answer right away. He poured a little water into a tin cup, set it over the fire, and watched the thin line of smoke rise before he finally spoke. Slow and heavy. "There are some things you lose, and you just stop being brave enough to say their names again." Rose fell silent. There was something in his tone, the calm ache of a man who had carried solitude longer than most, lived their whole lives. After a pause, Elias exhaled and continued. "Years ago, I was younger, meaner, maybe. I was riding through Red Valley when I came across a stagecoach raid. Everyone was dead except for one little girl. Couldn't speak. Couldn't even cry. Just stared at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. I patched her up, took her to a clinic nearby, then rode off. Never learned her name." Rose froze. The words hit her like a bullet she hadn't seen coming. The world around her seemed to fade, replaced by echoes, gunfire, screaming, and the stench of smoke. She remembered a red sky, the sound of gunshots and horses, a terrified 8-year-old hiding behind a broken wagon, trembling. Then a shadow, a man on horseback stopping beside her, wrapping her in a dusty coat, saying softly, "You're safe now, little one." That voice, deep, rough, kind, was the same voice speaking to her now. Rose's lips trembled. Her voice came out in a whisper. "That man. Was it you?" Elias lifted his head. The firelight painted lines of shadow and gold across his face, outlining every scar, every silence he'd ever lived through. He didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes was enough. The revolver slipped from her hands, landing in the sand with a dull thud. Rose pressed a shaking hand to her mouth as tears spilled freely. "God." I pointed a gun at the man who saved my life. Elias turned his face away. He didn't move closer, didn't comfort her. He just sat there, letting her cry because some tears, he knew, needed to fall in peace. They washed away more than grief. They cleansed the soul. Rose's sobs came softly at first, then steadier, deeper, the kind that rose from years of silence. The fire crackled, and with every flicker of light, fragments of her past returned: the girl who lost her family, her childhood, her trust and kindness, and the man who once gave her hope without asking anything in return. When her breathing slowed, she asked in a whisper, "You knew who I was from the start, didn't you?" Elias's voice was quiet, almost tender. I recognized your eyes the moment you pulled the gun. She looked up, tears shining in the firelight. Then why didn't you tell me sooner? He paused, eyes fixed on the fire, then said, softly, because when someone lives by hate, words can't save them. They have to see the truth for themselves. That's the only way a heart changes. The words hung between them, light as air, heavy as stone. Rose covered her face, trembling. The warmth of the fire brushed her skin, melting through years of frost inside her chest. Slowly, she breathed again, feeling something break, not in pain, but in release. Elias remained still, watching the flames dance. He didn't reach out, didn't speak. But his silence was kindness itself, the kind that gave her permission to be weak. When at last her voice returned, it was soft, fragile, but filled with clarity. You've saved me twice now. Elias Ward, once my life, and this time, my soul. He lowered his head, a faint smile ghosting across his lips, not joyful, but peaceful, like a man who had long since made peace with sorrow. The fire burned lower, and the desert wind outside calmed to a whisper. The scent of leather and smoke lingered between them, a reminder of survival, of humanity. Rose leaned back against the wall, eyes drifting toward him. In the dying glow of the fire, she realized something. The man she had sought for revenge was the same man who had taught her what compassion looked like. Elias turned his head slightly, his voice barely above a murmur. Get some rest. Rose, the storm's past. She nodded, eyes closing, tears drying slowly on her cheeks. Outside, the desert sighed the long, low breath of a land that had seen too much. Inside the stable, two hearts beat softly in the dark, finding again the forgotten memory of kindness, forgiveness, and a love quietly being born from the ashes of pain. Part 4. The Night of Truth. Night fell slowly over the desert. The storm had passed, but the air still shimmered with fine dust sifting through the cracks of the old stable roof. The wind no longer screamed. It murmured low, steady, like the earth itself whispering after its rage had cooled. The quiet was deep enough to hear everything: the crackle of the fire, the soft breath of horses outside, and the faint sound of two hearts learning how to breathe again. Rose sat beside the fire, hands wrapped around a tin cup, eyes fixed on the flame. The orange light flickered against her sunburnt cheeks, softening them into something almost tender. Across from her, Elias sat in silence, hat low, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the dirt floor. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled as though she were confessing something to the dark. You know, when I first saw you, I was sure you were the man who killed my father. I thought if I shot you, the pain would fade. But now, she paused, took a slow breath. Now I'm not even sure I remember what hate feels like. Elias didn't look up. He stirred the embers gently with a stick. Hate, he said, voice calm, deep, is the easiest thing to carry and the hardest thing to let go. Rose turned to him, the firelight gleaming in her eyes. I carried it for 10 years. I thought it made me strong, but it just made me chained. He finally lifted his head. Under the brim of his hat, his eyes glowed with the same firelight and the same darkness born from loss. Hate's heavy, ma'am. You carry it long enough. It'll shoot you first, The words hit her like truth spoken straight to the soul. She bowed her head, and the reflection of the flame shimmered in her eyes along with guilt, shame, and something rawer regret. After a moment, her voice broke the silence. And you said you lost everything. What did you lose? Elias exhaled, slow and heavy, like a stone dropping into dry water. A wife and a little girl. One morning, I left to fetch water from the well. When I came back, there was nothing left but ash and blood. Bandits passed through. The fire crackled sharply, a spark leaping onto his hand. He didn't flinch. Rose saw the scars there, rough, pale lines of survival carved into flesh that had known too much pain. She whispered, "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. It wasn't you. You're just trying to survive. Same as me." But Rose wasn't finished. Her voice trembled again, this time not from fear, but from release. "No. Elias, I'm sorry because I let my hate blind me. I looked at the man who saved me and pointed a gun at him. I became the same kind of monster I swore to destroy." He turned toward her. In the dim firelight, she saw not pity, but understanding, the kind that only comes from someone who's already walked through hell. His eyes were deep, sorrowful, yet steady, holding pieces of his own brokenness. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that flickered like smoke, brief but real. We all carry wounds. Rose, sometimes it's the pain that reminds us we're still alive. Her tears fell silently, landing on her calloused hands. A soft breeze slipped through the gaps in the wood, carrying the scent of wet earth and quiet forgiveness. For a long while, they sat without speaking, two souls who had lost too much, learning to exist in the same silence. Finally, Rose set her cup down and moved closer. Her steps were slow, tentative, afraid to disturb the fragile peace between them. She sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth. "You're not afraid of me?" she asked. Elias tilted his head slightly, voice low. "If I was, I wouldn't still be here. But you still have a choice. You can start over." She let out a shaky laugh. "Start over. I've got nothing left to begin with." He looked at her, then really looked, and his gaze seemed to strip away the walls she'd built around herself. "You've got a heart. And as long as it still hurts, it still knows how to love and to forgive." His words hit something deep within her. Hate had never made her strong, only numb. But sitting beside this man, who'd lost more than she could imagine, yet still spoke with kindness, she felt her heart begin to thaw. After a long silence, she asked softly, "Elias, did you ever forgive the ones who killed your family?" He smiled again, a weary, hollow smile that disappeared almost instantly. "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I stopped letting them kill me twice." Her breath caught. She understood now forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was freedom. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not pulling the trigger on me, even though I deserved it." He looked at her, eyes softer now, voice warm as the firelight. "A man who's lost everything, Rose, doesn't need to take anything more from anyone." She smiled faintly, though her tears still fell. Then she reached out and laid her hand over his rough, scarred, but real. He didn't pull away. His lips curved into another quiet, sad smile. You don't owe me anything. Rose, if you owe someone, it's yourself a chance to live without fear again. Her tears fell silently. For the first time in years, the weight she carried began to lift. In that flickering light, she wasn't the vengeful girl from yesterday anymore. She was a woman rediscovering who she was beneath the dust and pain. Elias watched her, that same gentle smile still there, tired, tender, human. Sleep. Rose, you fought long enough. She nodded, leaning back against the wooden wall, eyes fluttering shut. Outside, the wind stirred again, not angry this time, but calm, almost soothing. And as the fire dwindled to glowing coals, its last light traced their faces, two lost souls in the heart of the desert, who, for one night, had found what they thought was gone forever: faith in kindness. Part 5. The Return of Bandits. Dawn crept over the desert like a fragile promise. The first light of day slipped through the gaps in the wooden walls, catching the dust that still hung in the air. The storm was gone, leaving behind a soft gold sky and the scent of warm earth. Rose woke first. Elias was already sitting by the door, holding a tin cup of black coffee, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the horizon, somewhere that no longer existed. The stillness between them was almost holy. For the first time, Rose wasn't afraid of being near him. She felt something different: peace, the kind she hadn't known since childhood. But in the West, peace never lasts long. The ground began to tremble. At first it was faint, then louder, heavier, like the drumming of a coming storm. Rose frowned. The sound grew sharper, the unmistakable rhythm of hooves. Elias set his cup down and rose to his feet, his head tilting slightly. The wind carried with it the metallic rattle of weapons, the kind that always meant death was coming. He spoke softly, but his tone was grave. The bandits. You were right. Rose. They've come for you. Her face went pale. No. They can't. They're dead, I saw. No. Elias cut in. Calm, but cold. Evil doesn't die that easy. Outside, the rumble grew into a roar. Dust billowed high into the sky as 3 riders emerged, dressed in black, eyes glinting like knives beneath the rising sun. Their horses snorted and pawed at the ground. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the wind. Elias turned to her. He took off his coat, laid it gently over her shoulders. Stay behind. Don't move till I say. She shook her head violently. No, they came for me. He rested a hand on her shoulder, firm, steady, kind. You've been running your whole life. Rose, let me stand this time. Before she could protest, he stepped out into the open. The light of dawn fell across him, tall, lean, unshaken. His boots struck the dry earth with a sound that felt like fate itself. The leader of the bandits sneered. Well, look who we've got here. Some worn-out cowboy playing hero. Elias's reply was low, even, and cold as steel. Don't need to play. I was born that way. Silence fell, then chaos. Gunfire cracked through the air, echoing against the wooden walls. Elias dove aside, drawing faster than the eye could follow. One bandit fell instantly, crashing into the dust. Inside the stable, Rose flinched at every shot. Her hands trembled so violently she could hardly breathe. The world outside was nothing but thunder bullets, hooves, and wind screaming through broken boards. Then a sharp cry. Elias staggered. A crimson bloom spread across his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, gritting his teeth. Elias Rose screamed. Without thinking, she grabbed the nearest gun, the same revolver she'd once aimed at his heart. Bursting out into the open, her hair whipped by the wind, she saw the last two bandits turning toward her. One aimed for Elias. The other raised his gun at her. She fired. Once. Twice. The sound cracked through the dawn like thunder splitting the sky. Both men dropped dust and smoke swirling where they fell. And then silence. The kind of silence that follows death. Rose stood frozen, chest heaving. The gun slipped from her hand and hit the ground. Then she was running knees, hitting the sand as she fell beside Elias. He sat slumped against a beam, blood soaking through his shirt. His hand still clutched his gun, but his eyes were dimming. Rose pulled him close, tears mixing with the dust on his face. "You fool. Why'd you stand in front of me?" Elias's lips twitched into a faint, weary smile. "Guess my heart was too big a target." The words broke her. She pressed her hands against his wound, shaking. "Don't talk. Please, Elias. You're gonna be fine. You will." He smiled again, softer this time, almost at peace. "I used to think if I ever found someone worth dying for, it'd be the one who could point a gun at me and still make me believe in good again." Her sobs came hard and fast. "Don't close your eyes. Don't you dare leave me." Elias struggled to keep his gaze on her, tired, unfocused, but steady to the end. "I'm not leaving. Rose, just restin' a while." Rose held him tight, her tears falling onto the dust, onto his blood. Outside, the sun climbed higher, its light spilling across the desert like fire, wrapping them in gold and sorrow. The bandits lay still on the sand, the wind whispering over their bodies, not with rage, but with finality. Rose lifted her head toward the blazing sky, her face streaked with dirt and tears. In that moment, she understood something she'd never known before. Courage wasn't killing the enemy. It was loving someone enough to risk being broken again. In the light of morning, she held Elias's hand warm, fading, but still gripping hers. The desert wind rose one last time, swirling around them like a prayer, and in its quiet hum, Rose realized that from this moment on, her heart no longer belonged to her alone. Part 6. The Wound and the Firelight. Night descended slowly over the desert, carrying with it the chill that slipped through every whisper of wind. The pale moonlight draped itself across the sand, stained dark where blood had fallen. Near the small campfire, two figures sat close, a wounded man and a trembling woman caught somewhere between fear, guilt, and something new she didn't yet dare to name. Rose knelt beside Elias, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the small medicine pouch he always carried. Blood still oozed from his shoulder, soaking through the faded fabric of his shirt. She tore a strip of cloth, trying to stop the bleeding, but her hands wouldn't steady, not because of the blood, but because of the unbearable thought of losing him. "Hold still. Please don't move," she whispered, her voice quivering, more a plea than a command. Elias smiled faintly, his breath ragged. "Easy now. You've already hit the heart." The words made her pause, eyes locking on his face. Even in pain, his gaze carried warmth, the kind of warmth born not from strength, but from love and acceptance of everything life had taken away. "Don't joke like that," she said through gritted teeth. "You're losing too much blood." "I have to save me," he interrupted softly. "Thought maybe this time. It's your turn." Her lips trembled. She bent closer, tying the cloth tightly around his wound. He winced but made no sound. Each time she pulled the knot tighter. He felt the sting, but he let her do it. Tears slipped down her cheeks, falling onto his shirt, mixing with his blood until the fabric turned a deep, dark red. Elias watched her quietly. In her shaking hands, he saw everything: guilt, sorrow, tenderness, all colliding in a storm she didn't know how to stop. Outside, the desert wind hissed softly through the sand. The fire popped and cracked, the sound filling the silence between their breaths. When she was done, she kept her palm pressed against his wound, as if her hand alone could keep him alive. He turned his head slightly toward her and murmured, "You know, Rose, when you aimed that gun at me, I wasn't afraid. But when I saw you cry, I was terrified you'd never forgive yourself." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you step in front of the bullet for me? You didn't owe me anything." Elias closed his eyes briefly, exhaling slowly. "Not because I owed you, because I couldn't watch another innocent soul bleed out while I stood by. I couldn't save my wife and daughter, but this time, I wasn't going to let history repeat itself." Rose looked at him for a long moment. The firelight carved his face in gold and shadowed the scars, the lines of grief, the tired strength of a man who had lived through hell and still chose to be kind. "You're insane," she said softly, half laughing, half crying. "No one risks their life for a stranger." Elias's smile deepened small, but real. Maybe. But in the West, chances to do the right thing don't come often. I wasn't going to waste my last one. She gave a trembling laugh through her tears. "You don't understand. Elias, I've lived on hate for so long, I don't even know how to live without it." He tilted his head toward her, voice gentle, steady as a prayer. "Then start tonight. Start by saving someone, even if it's the man you once wanted dead." Her chest tightened. His words simple, raw, slid past every wall she'd built. For the first time, she felt warmth spreading through her, not from the fire, but from him. For a while, neither spoke. They just looked at each other, no guns, no masks, no lies. Two people stripped bare of everything but truth. Then Rose whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe I wasn't meant to hurt it. Maybe I was meant to heal it." Elias's smile softened. He closed his eyes, letting the firelight flicker across both their faces, one weary with loss, the other reborn through compassion. Rose kept her hand on his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat slow but steady. The night around them was quiet now, the kind of silence that carries peace, not fear. The desert wind brushed past them gently, humming low through the sand, like a lullaby. The fire burned bright orange and alive, a reflection of the fragile hope rekindling between them. And in that lonely desert night surrounded by blood, fire, and dust, Rose finally understood. Healing isn't forgetting the wound. It's learning to love it as part of who you are. Part 7. The morning after dawn poured over the desert like honey, soft, golden, and gentle. A thin mist drifted across the red sand, turning the world into a dream that hadn't yet decided to fade. No more gunfire, no howling wind. Only silence, the rare kind of silence that feels like a prayer after the storm has passed. Rose sat beside Elias, who was still asleep near the dying fire. The coat he had draped around her shoulders the night before was still there, still warm with his scent of smoke and leather. In the first light, she studied his face, the scars, the sharp lines softened by sleep, the faint curve of his lips as though he was dreaming of peace. Her hand trembled slightly as she checked the bandage on his shoulder. The bleeding had stopped. The cloth was dark and stiff, but dry. He was breathing evenly, the slow rhythm of a man who had walked to the edge of death and found his way back. When the first ray of sun touched his face, Elias stirred. His amber eyes opened, catching the morning light. Rose gasped softly, relief flooding her voice. "You're awake." He blinked, a small, crooked smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah. Thought I was dreaming, seeing an angel watching over me." Rose laughed under her breath, shaking her head. "I'm no angel. If I were, I'd be the one who tried to shoot you." Elias raised an eyebrow, smirking faintly. "Then I guess I'm the first fool ever praying to be shot by an angel." They both laughed, a small, tired laugh, but real. It filled the air between them, chasing away the last remnants of fear. For the first time, their laughter didn't sound like defense. It sounded like freedom. Rose turned her gaze toward the sunrise, then back at him. "I never thanked you for not pulling the trigger." Elias met her eyes. The edge in his stare was gone, replaced by warmth as gentle as dawn itself. "Ain't my style to shoot first or to stop believing." The words settled deep in her chest. She looked at him, really, looked and realized that faith wasn't some luxury people lost with time. It lived, right here, in front of her, wearing a dusty hat and a half-healed wound. Elias shifted, pushing himself up slowly. She reached out instinctively to stop him, but he waved it off. "Just a little sore," he said with a rough chuckle. "Had worse." She frowned, crossing her arms. "You say that like it's something to be proud of." He grinned, voice low and teasing. "Not proud. Just figure if I'm still breathing. Maybe I ain't done yet. Done with what teaching a certain lady how to put down her gun before it pulls the trigger again." Rose rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. The wind picked up gently, brushing her hair across his face. Neither of them moved. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was comfortable, alive with unspoken things. She looked out at the horizon, where the sun was climbing higher, painting the desert in shades of fire and gold. "You know," she murmured, "this is the first sunrise I've seen without thinking about the darkness before it." Elias nodded, his voice soft. "Good. Means you've already won what yourself." They shared a quiet smile, the kind that says more than words ever could. The smile of two people who had been lost in the storm and somehow found their way to the same sunrise. Rose realized something as she looked at him. The hatred that had once eaten away at her, the anger that had defined her, was melting, slow and tender, like the mist lifting from the sand. She didn't look at Elias as the man she had once feared or blamed. She looked at him with gratitude, not only for saving her life, but for giving her back something she thought was gone forever: faith in people. The desert wind stirred again. Elias closed his eyes, breathing deeply the scent of dust, sunlight, and freedom mingling in the air. Rose watched him and smiled softly. Seems like you were born to make people feel less afraid. He opened his eyes, voice low and calm. Nah. Just trying to remind him they used to be brave. The sunlight spilled fully into the world then, wrapping them both in its warmth. Two souls. No longer strangers. Two hearts. No longer hiding. And as the desert glowed with life again, Rose understood some wounds don't need to be covered, because it's through the cracks that the light finally gets in. Part 8. The Ride of Redemption. The sun climbed higher, spreading its warm breath across the desert. The sand had dried. The wind had quieted. Only the faint scent of gunpowder and ash lingered where death had brushed past the night before. High above, a few vultures circled lazily, but neither Elias nor Rose cared to look. They just wanted to leave this place, the place where life and death had shared the same breath. Elias sat tall in the saddle now, though his shoulders still ached with every movement. He hid the pain behind that half-smile of a man who'd learned long ago that weakness had no place in the Wild West. Rose stepped closer, hesitant. "You sure you can ride?" He smirked, tired, stubborn, but alive. In the West, you don't walk. You ride. If you stop riding, you're already dead. She nodded quietly. He reached out a hand. "Come on. I'll show you how to sit steady." Her fingers brushed his palm, rough, scarred, but warm. She climbed up behind him, moving carefully, awkwardly. The horse shifted under them, and she caught her breath, almost losing balance. Elias turned slightly, catching her hand, guiding it to his side. His voice came low, calm, steady, the same voice that had faced storms and bullets without flinching. "Don't hold too tight. Just trust the rhythm. Horses feel fear." "And what about you?" she asked softly. "Do you?" He smiled faintly, eyes on the horizon. "Used to. Now I just trust." The wind swept through the dunes, carrying the scent of dust and sun. The horse began to move, slow and steady, hooves tapping a heartbeat into the earth. Rose hesitated at first, then slowly wrapped her arms around him. The warmth of his back seeped into her hands, spreading like light through a long frozen heart. They rode in silence, but it was a full, living silence. The kind where every breath, every sway, every heartbeat felt shared. Elias pointed ahead toward a long trail winding through the red cliffs. "That's the way out. Past those rocks. There's a station. You can catch a coach anywhere from there." Rose looked to where he pointed, her voice low. "And you, I don't stay anywhere long," he said, his smile faint but peaceful. "Wind blows. I follow." She lowered her eyes. The morning sun caught in her hair, turning each strand into gold. Elias felt her breath behind him, soft, warm, heavy with something she didn't yet understand. The horse hit a slope, stumbling slightly. Rose lurched forward, her hands grabbing his arm. For a heartbeat, their faces nearly touched close enough for him to feel the tremble of her breath. "Careful there," he murmured, smiling weakly. "I ain't got much left in me to save you again." She laughed softly, the sound breaking through the weight of the morning. But the laughter faded, leaving behind a quiet too deep to ignore. She looked up at the sky streaks of red and gold painting the desert in firelight. "I used to hate red," she said slowly. "It always meant blood. and loss. But now, it's beautiful. Elias didn't turn around, but his tone softened. Maybe it's beautiful because you're finally seeing it with different eyes. She was silent for a long moment, the wind brushing her cheek. Then she asked, her voice no louder than a whisper, "You think people can change?" Elias's hands tightened slightly on the reins. His eyes fixed on the endless horizon where the sun met the sand, that thin, glowing line between what was and what could be. Only when someone believes they can. Rose's lips curved into a smile, soft, hidden, but full of meaning. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. Because she knew now she was that someone. She believed in him. Not because he needed saving, but because he deserved to be loved. The morning breeze swept across them, carrying the warmth of light and the scent of dust. Elias tilted his head slightly and said, "Hold on tight. Road gets rough ahead." Rose nodded, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. Her eyes fluttered shut as the horse carried them forward, hooves drumming like a slow song of redemption. Far ahead, the horizon shimmered, a ribbon of gold stretching endlessly. Two riders, one heart still healing, another learning to forgive, riding side by side through the great desert. In that vast, unending land, where the wind never stops and the past never fully dies, only one thing remains: eternal faith. Part 9. The Quiet Town. The sun stood high when they finally reached the town, a small, quiet place tucked deep in the wide plains. Wooden houses leaned into the wind, their tin roofs dulled by years of heat. The main road was coated in dust, shimmering beneath the afternoon light. No gunfire. No storm, only the lazy rhythm of boots on wood and the soft clinking of a wind chime above an old cafe door. Rose looked around. No one paid them much mind, two dusty travelers, a man in a torn coat and a woman who looked like she'd crawled her way out of hell. Yet in her eyes, for the first time, there was something Elias hadn't seen before: peace. He dismounted slowly, wincing as his shoulder pulled, then turned to help her down. His hand was rough but gentle, steady as the land itself. "You should rest," he said. "There's a clinic down that street. I'll get this wound looked at, and pick up a few things for you." She nodded, watching him as he walked away, that quiet, limping stride of a man who'd learned to carry pain without letting it break him. Elias stepped into a narrow street lined with sunburnt wooden fronts and found what he was looking for: a small gunsmith shop. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle. The shopkeeper, an older man with tobacco-stained fingers, looked up from his newspaper. "What'll it be?" Cowboy Elias placed a few silver coins on the counter. Something small, light, easy to handle, but strong enough to protect what matters. The shopkeeper's eyes softened. He didn't ask questions. A few minutes later, Elias walked out into the sun, a new revolver gleaming in his hand, the kind of weapon made not for vengeance, but for faith. Back at the clinic, Rose sat on the steps, her hair loose, strands of gold flickering in the sunlight. When she saw him, her expression softened, a mixture of relief and something tender she hadn't let herself feel in years. He stopped before her, holding the gun out, handle first. "What's this?" she asked, startled. Elias's voice came low, calm, carrying the kind of warmth that comes from trust. "Keep it. Might need it to protect someone. Maybe even me." She froze. The gun felt heavier than it looked, not from its weight, but from what it meant. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a symbol of belief, of second chances, of the quiet kind of strength that comes from forgiveness. Her eyes lifted to his. In the sunlight, she smiled a real smile, soft and radiant as morning breaking across the desert. Elias felt something stir inside him. His chest tightened, not from pain, but from a warmth he hadn't known for years. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was just the simple grace of being alive again. He nodded, placing his hat back on his head, his gaze drifting toward the road that led out of town. You should stay here a few days. Rest. I've got some things to take care of. She rose, clutching the gun to her chest. Where will you go? He smiled faintly, his voice rough as gravel but kind as dawn. Wherever someone needs help. The West's a big place. Rose. She took a step closer, her eyes glistening full of words she didn't know how to say. The wind carried the scent of dry grass. The sunlight caught the gun's metal, scattering it like tears. She reached out, taking his hand, that calloused hand that once trembled from pain, now warm and real in hers. Will you come back? She whispered. Elias smiled, that same gentle, tired smile she had learned to read so well. Maybe. When the wind blows your way. They stood there for a long moment in the dust and the sunlight, in the heart of a town that seemed untouched by time. Rose watched him walk away, his coat swaying lightly in the wind. She still held the gun, not out of fear, but as a promise. A reminder that it wasn't meant to kill, but to protect the good still left in the world. She understood now. That gun wasn't his gift. It was faith made tangible. Faith that she could be more than her past. Faith that she could choose mercy over revenge. As the sound of his footsteps faded into the distance, Rose's smile lingered gentle and golden, like the first light of dawn breaking over the Wild West. And in that still moment, she realized what Elias had truly left behind. Not a weapon, but a belief that even a broken heart can be held together again by its own hands. Part 10. The Farewell at Sunrise. Early morning, the first light of the sun touched the endless stretch of sand, turning the desert into a golden silk sheet. A soft breeze swept through, carrying the last chill of night, the scent of dry grass and the lingering red dust after the storm. Elias had risen before dawn. He stood outside the small clinic, tightening the saddle straps with one hand, the other still wrapped in bandages. But his eyes were steadier than ever. No longer the eyes of a man merely surviving, but of one who had found a reason to keep going. Rose stood by the wooden doorway, silently watching him. In her hands, she held the small revolver he had given her the day before. It was heavier than she remembered, not because of the steel, but because of what it meant. Every time she looked at it, she heard his voice again. Keep it. Might need it to protect someone, maybe even me. And now, the one who needed protecting was the one leaving. She wanted to call his name, to tell him to stay just for one more day. One more morning, but the words stuck in her throat. Maybe she was afraid. Afraid that if she asked him to stop, his heart would never be free again. And she knew Elias Ward was the kind of man who could only be loved through freedom, never kept by pleading. Elias mounted his horse. He didn't turn around right away. He paused, as if feeling her gaze upon his back. The slanted sunlight fell across the scar on his cheek, glinting faintly like an old memory refusing to fade. At last, he spoke, his voice low, calm, carried by the wind. Don't forget to drink water. The desert ain't kind to dreamers. Then he tugged the reins, lowered his hat, and rode toward the sunlit road. Rose remained at the doorway. The morning light poured over her face, painting her skin in shades of gold. The wind teased her hair, tugged gently at her dress. With each step his horse took, his figure grew smaller until he was nothing but a dark speck in the sea of light. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, her eyes glistening, her heart aching with a strange mix of emptiness and warmth. The sunlight reflected in her eyes, flickering like a tiny flame newly lit. She gripped the revolver tighter, whispering into the wind, her voice so soft it belonged only to the desert. "You should have shot my heart first, cowboy, 'cause now it belongs to you." The wind carried her words away, scattering them with the sand, a secret meant only for two souls. She drew a long breath, closed her eyes, and let the warmth of the rising sun brush her skin. In that moment, she could almost feel him still there, that gentle smile, those sorrowful eyes, that deep voice echoing somewhere in her mind. Out on the horizon, Elias rode across the open sands. In the distance, a harmonica tune began to play low, aching, yet full of hope. It blended with the rhythm of hooves fading away, a farewell song from the West itself, for those who carried wounds but still chose to believe in goodness. Rose opened her eyes, gazing toward the horizon where light and shadow merged. She smiled, not the smile of goodbye, but of faith. Faith that somewhere out there, across the burning desert, a man was still riding, still keeping an unspoken promise in the West. Love doesn't just find people, it redeems them. As the harmonica slowly faded into the wind, only the image of the woman remained standing silently by the doorway, revolver in hand, eyes fixed on the sunrise where love, trust, and forgiveness meet upon the same road. The story ended in the brilliance of a new day, and her heart, from that moment on, would keep beating, but to the rhythm of a cowboy named Elias Ward. The desert returned to its stillness. The wind swept through the dry grass, lifting grains of sand into the air, as if to erase every trace of the long night, the gunfight, the blood, the tears. Yet some things, the wind could never take: memories, kindness, and love. Rose stood quietly at the doorway of the clinic, where dawn had washed away the dark. In her hand, the revolver he left behind was no longer a weapon of vengeance, it was a symbol of faith. She looked toward the horizon where he had gone, and in her heart echoed the words he once spoke: "Only when someone believes they can." She nodded softly. Now she understood true love doesn't save people. It makes them want to save themselves, from afar. The harmonica played again, carried by the wind, a gentle reminder that in the West, even broken hearts can beat once more, if someone is willing to listen, to believe, and to love again. In the Wild West, love doesn't just find people, it redeems them. A cold-hearted cowboy who loved through redemption. It wasn't just the story of Elias and Rose, it was the story of every lost heart, of those who once thought the past was a sentence, only to realize that love is the way out. If you believe everyone deserves a second chance, leave a comment below. And if this story touched your heart, rate it from 0 to 10, then follow to ride with me through more tales of the Wild West, where kindness, love, and forgiveness are the only bullets that can save a broken heart. The harmonica played one last time, slow, mournful, but warm and true, just like the West itself, where love always finds its way back home.
He found peace, not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving.